Our last talk of the morning is from somebody who's been there and done that. So thus far, all of our discussions have been, while grounded in science and engineering, somewhat conjectural. But John is going to be talking with us about his experience actually deploying. Now, there's one thing I want to be sure everybody realizes, which is that Europa is not Antarctica. Europa is not even Antarctica just without an atmosphere. The conditions are similar but also vastly different. That being said, this is the best and only way we have of getting field experience doing this kind of work. And the lessons we learn here, many of them, I think, will be directly applicable.
All right. So what I'm going to do is talk about how we know they're subglacial lakes under the Antarctic Ice Sheet, right? About 70% of our world's fresh water is down there. 90% of the ice on Earth is in Antarctica. And how we know life's there, why we went there for life. And I want to make a comment here. I was chief scientist on the WISSARD and SALSA projects, and I'm a microbiologist or a geobiologist. And so my philosophy we're writing the proposals, put our target right up front, biology, our search for life, and everything else will fall into place, and it did. So that's one thing I've seen in a lot of the NASA committees I've been on is they're all searching for life, but there's no biologist involved. So I'm going to talk about WISSARD, which is now over. I just finished the final report 2 weeks ago, an upcoming project called SALSA, and I'll give you these acronyms later. You've got to have good acronyms. Contamination Control for Planetary Protection and Sample Integrity. We publish our contamination to show that our samples are clean, and they were. And then this is a segue. I'm sharing this talk with Dennis Duling, who was the lead driller. And this is just, he'll talk about this. And I'll stop right here and then turn it over to him. Okay? So how do we, some of the similarities first of subglacial lake exploration and outer solar system exploration. So about 15 years ago, Antarctica was thought to be a dead continent, a benign piece of ice. 60 years ago, the outer solar system was largely seen as this icy planetary graveyard. It took 13 years of indirect measurements to imply the existence of subglacial water and life before we finally got funded to do this. Took a lot of lobbying, a lot of time on National Science Foundation and NASA's doorstep. And over on the solar system side of things, indirect measurements on icy moons. And we heard already today a lot of indirect measurements and kind of getting there. Anyway, the direct sampling, it hasn't been done. Environmental stewardship, sample contamination issues on both sides. And that's a real thing that you're going to run into. A couple of things. These are both National Academies reports. Here's one on exploration of Antarctic subglacial lakes, and you can't read it, environmental and stewardship issues, that's what that's, and preventing foreign contamination in Europa. So we're seeing a lot of parallels here. And let's go back down. And the coordination of our work was through ICSU, the International Committee of Scientific Unions, and SCAR is our kind of the umbrella group in the on Earth that was formed in '57 that kind of had to endorse our work. Okay, and over on the outer space side of things, it's COSPAR, again under ICSU. And if you've ever read their the COSPAR documents and the SCAR documents, they're very, very similar. So a lot can be learned from the planetary protection side of things. Well, how do we know these lakes are there? We use radar, satellite altimetry, ground penetrating radar, seismics, GPS, and ISAT. We were using a lot of ISAT altimetry, the geophysics team, to understand the optics. So when you look at the ice from the surface, this is just a cartoon, but we see depressions where there's a lake. And so this is a little artist rendition. And what happens, and a lot of both SALSA and WISSARD, our study lakes, you're going to see a lake flow into this one, and you'll watch the ice drop and go back up. Okay, and right now we're using mostly GPS data. So by looking at that surface ice movement, we're able to look at entire sub-ice hydrology through several kilometers of ice. That's what we're working at.
Does that work over? How much time does it take to do that?
Oh, that's a good question. That takes about were those flushes, or it depends on the lakes. They're about, these active lakes, they're probably about 5 years. Actually, the floods occur really quickly. Subglacial floods they'll happen in a year. See the surface moving, yeah. So when we look at the Whillans, the WISSARD study, and SALSA lakes, they're draining and filling about every 8 years, and right now they're in a filling cycle. So when we drill next year, we should be increasing, and that's important to know when we're looking for the biology. So, you know, one thing, since our GPS data is really our biggest, we have a huge GPS network out here, you know, maybe you put a bunch of CubeSats on Europa and look at those dynamics closely. That's my little, you know, I'm not a planetary scientist, that's probably harder. Okay, so here's the entire, this is from the Canadian Space Agency, they made this, but here's Antarctica, right? It's about the 5th largest continent. It is the 5th largest continent. And I just got to allude to Lake Vostok just a little bit because we've learned so much there. Lake Vostok's here, and I'll show you a satellite. You can see it from space. There should be a little cube coming in. There we go. So right over here, you're going to see Lake Vostok. So this ice is moving about 2 meters a year out to the ocean, and it floats over this lake. Okay? So we can see it from space. There it is. It's about 250 kilometers across. It's about the size of Lake Ontario. Okay? And it's honing in on that little speck, and that's Vostok Station. That's the Russian station. This is their traverse route. They drive their tractors out to support that station. They put their station, they started, they set this up in the late 50s, early 60s for climate work, and they started drilling a borehole. If they would have been over here, they would have missed the lake entirely. So there's a lot of serendipity in this whole story, but we've learned a lot from the ice collected at that borehole. A little bit about Vostok, just to show you some of these lakes are big, okay? 5,400 cubic kilometers of water. The depth is about 1,000 meters. Backed out of models, we get about 50 milliwatts per meter squared geothermal flux. And one thing I want to point out is the ice. Again, here's another picture from space. Ice thickness difference across that water-ice interface is a little bit, there's about a 600 meter difference between the north and south end, and that changes the pressure freezing point at each of those ends, and that plays a big bit of our story here. So here's a cartoon that I put together. So ice is flowing across this Vostok. It's flowing about 2 meters a year. This is Vostok Station borehole. Okay, and they have now penetrated the lake. They did that in 2012. And they took a 420,000 year climate record from this meteoric ice. This ice is snow that's been compressed into ice or metamorphosed into ice. Contains a climate signal, and then they hit some very interesting ice with like 1 meter diameter crystals, really low conductivity, and they stopped drilling for about 10 years until SCAR intervened and got a group of experts to look into this whole thing. But so some of the things that we kind of have pretty good handle on based on helium isotope data from the ice cores. Incidentally, most of our data was from the ice here that it accreted. So in this part of the lake, where the pressure melting point is different than here, we get actual melting and then freezing or accretion in the bottom. Okay? So everything that goes into this lake, the water, the microbes, gases, ions, whatever, comes in here, freezes out. This is very clean ice. Okay? I've held pieces of this ice, we've worked on it a lot, and it goes out. The retention time of the water in that lake is about 10,000 years. Okay? The lake's been ice covered for about 15 million, so it hasn't seen light for about 15 million years. So we were real excited to get to see life in here, but we have yet to do this one, and it's another story. Okay, so that's kind of our cartoon of the lake.
Comment on the geothermal?
Yeah, so this the French study, and all of our evidence for a lot of this is based on isotopes and what we get from accretion ice. So understanding of this accretion process was interesting, or is really important. So they were using helium-3, helium-4 isotopes, and they wrote a paper in Nature, and they concluded it was geothermal. There's some conflicting information on that now. There's still a lot of conflicts on Vostok, and a lot of it's Russian involvement. But we were able to get we were able to get ice from almost 4,000 meters, that accretion ice. And you can see some names in here. You can see Mary Wojtek was part of this project, Chris McKay, and others you may not recognize. But these are SEM, and this is an atomic force micrograph. These are images of actual microbes from the accretion ice down near the ice-water interface. We were extracting DNA. We were able to identify those. Mary did all the DNA work for us. And I just want to show you the last paragraph in there. In that 1999 paper, microbes within a liquid water habitat deep below a frozen surface provide an analog for possible life on Europa. And this was in 1999. We were already using these kind of as these earthbound systems to look out into space, okay? So Chris McKay actually became involved here. And we got Chris, he stayed involved, and we brought Kevin Hand, a young Kevin Hand in at this. He's still a young Kevin Hand, but he was really young back here over 10 years ago. But this was, and I think Kevin pushed most of the numbers on this model. But when we're trying to figure out how to drill into this lake, we worried about the accretion ice going out. It's low in gas, low in material, so gases should build up, right? The meteoric ice has got about 10% by volume air, right? That's where we get our climate CO2 and all the signatures of methane, et cetera. So as we go with the age of the lake, this is in residence times. So residence time is about, one residence time is about 10,000 years. The gas in the lake just builds up and builds up and builds up until we get about 30 or 300,000 years old, right about in here, and it goes into clathrate. And there was a lot of worries. What do you do if we drill into a lake that's pressurized? And these are the numbers we got. And we actually put in Coca-Cola. That trade name is in that paper, this paper over here. And if the water was to come up a borehole, I think it was about 1,000 meters. Kevin, it was about that. And it would be like taking your beer bottle, we used to do this in college, bang it, and it would just come blasting out through the top, right? Or you would just start degassing it. So also, it'd be supersaturated in a lot of gases, all gases, but oxygen in particular. And most of the clathrates we think are air clathrate. If they're CO2 clathrate, they would sink. That's in the paper too. So we're looking at all these boundary conditions, and it's really something for any driller to think about when you're going into a cavity, subsurface cavity, what's going to happen. This is 2 liters of Coca-Cola, and you put a Mentos in it, and that's what happens. But you have 5,400 cubic kilometers of water in Vostok. If you drill in and that water comes up in the borehole, you're going to have an amazing blowout. Chris McKay estimated it'd be about a month. You would change the climate on Earth, or southern hemisphere. So let's talk about some of the projects. Whillans Ice Stream Subglacial Access Research Drilling. That's the WISSARD project. And it was a big integrated systems approach driven by biology. Okay? It was at the end. That was the main goal. And it's really to study the dynamic glaciology, sedimentology, and biogeochemical processes as they all work together to stabilize the ice sheet and influence the structure and function of the microbes. What we did here was we drilled a hole here into a lake to about 1,000 meters of ice, roughly, and Dennis will talk about that. And then we had an idea from our surface geophysics team where the river goes in, and we drilled out here. And we can see the flow out here now using noble gases. And that paper hopefully will get published soon. So that was the kind of the overview of that project. And I don't have time to really go and show you DNA stuff, and I don't want to. Key findings: GPS data reveal cascading subglacial floods, like the one I showed you in the little movie. Process models show that flow channels, when you have flow under the ice, you have to have a channel. Is it melted into the bottom of the ice, or is it into the sediments? And that this model showed that it was a deformable subglacial sediment. This is maybe a surprise. We've heard a lot about geothermal heat flux. We did direct measurements using a geothermal probe. This is Andy Fisher at Santa Cruz, UC Santa Cruz, 285 milliwatts per meter squared. Right, the Earth average about 50, so it's a hot spot, and that's probably why there's so much water down there in this particular place. A genomic analysis revealed about 4,000 bacterial species. I would have never guessed that. Anarchaeal, bacteria and archaeal, prokaryotes, and they were distinct from those in the drilling, the drill water and the borehole water, so they were clean samples. The way we do our DNA, we put down into the lake through 1,000 meters of ice, a system will let it filter water down in the water cavity for about 5 hours. Then we bring the whole thing up so it's clean, it's all encased, we take it back to the lab and extract DNA.
So when you say that the microbes you found in your borehole were different than in the water column and in the lake, the microbes...
I should say not from they're not different. They're different from the drilling water and the borehole. So what we found down there was distinct from the other sources we sampled.
Okay.
Does
and
that,
the stuff
yeah.
you found in the ice sheet drill through is essentially just airfall microbes.
Yes, it is, and there's about 200 to 300 cells per gram of ice, roughly. That's just airfall. Yep,
And
it is.
What was your density? You said 200 cells per gram of ice. What was it down?
Down in the water is about 10 to the 5th. Yeah, yeah. We would have never guessed that. So yeah.
So building off Kirk's question, so are you envisioning that these are the life you found in the water is microbes that evolved in that system, or that you actually
That maybe
created
there was an old
life?
Dutch microbiologist named Bos Becking published a paper in 1943, said microbes, everything's everywhere the environment selects, and I'm kind of going along those lines. They're getting, what we see in the lake is different from the ice too genetically, based on sequence data. We don't really know the origin of these bugs. We've got one borehole in Antarctica, that whole continent, and so we have an N of 1, but it's either coming somewhere from upstream, or it's about a 30,000 year trip through the ice to melt out in the
But
bottom.
you can't say necessarily that if you were in an environment like Europa that didn't have microbes seeding it to begin with necessarily, that
Nope.
you would create the system that you're now.
Actually, Kevin and I published a paper, and we talked about a second origin of life in Europa, and time is a big player in that. But everything else is there. All the redox couples should be there.
So
Okay.
you were doing hot water drilling,
Hot water drilling, and Dennis is yeah.
and so obviously you had mixing.
Not in the lake cavity, we did not. And Dennis will talk about we back pressured the borehole and let the lake come up.
Okay.
Yeah,
All right.
we did not
Because
mix.
I was wondering
Yeah.
if maybe you also had some dormancy issues with.
No, we went through great pains, and we've done this now in 2 boreholes down one off by the ocean. Anyway, just a few more things to get through this. A lot of the microbes we found were closely related to deep sea habitats, cold seeps, and the salts. The prevalence of taxa phylogenetic related to microbial species that get their energy from rocks, right? They're chemolithoautotrophs. We saw the systems running on that. A lot of sulfur and nitrogen compounds were driving that. And then this methane thing was something we didn't expect, but we had a paper in Nature Geoscience a couple months ago on this, and we found a lot of methane. And it was diffusing up through the sediments. We found no RNA or DNA signatures of those methanogens. The methane is biogenic based on deuterium and C13 data, but it's hydrogenotrophic. It's H2 plus CO2 produced methane. It's not fermentative or cetoclastic methane. Okay, and I'm going to just set up Dennis a little more. Our clean. We published all our background data in the boreholes, and that was published in Nature about 2 years ago. So I'm just going to SALSA. We haven't done this yet. We were supposed to do it this year, but because of budgets and logistics, et cetera, we now have been moved back. We're still going down this year and prepping a bit more. Here's basically the overarching hypothesis that builds off WISSARD. Contemporary biodiversity and carbon cycling is regulated by cycling of relict organic matter. West Antarctica is not a very stable piece of Antarctica. The oceans come in and out. West Antarctica is gone. The ice sheet's come and gone. Sea level's risen 30 meters every time it does it. You know, so it's been going out, and I think what we're seeing is is a marine influence there. Also, we've developed a much more complicated model over here, conceptual model. I'll get to that in a minute. Okay, so in 2019. January, we'll drill through about 1,200 meters of ice into Subglacial Lake Mercer, which is pretty far south at the base of the Transantarctic Mountains, with 3 main goals: to look at the stability of the ice sheet, to see last time the ocean was in there, to give us an idea of what climate's been doing in the past, look at the subglacial hydrology, and again, the biosphere, the steep cold biosphere. And we're letting the biology drive this too. So it's hot water boreholes. Okay, and I'm going to just give Dennis a heads up on that. This time we're going to put in an ROV. We've already played with this in deep boreholes, and we've looked up at the bottom of the ice, but this one is going to be have a little more mobility, better camera systems, and so we'll be able to swim around in this water cavity, which we think is about 20 meters deep. Mercer's not a Vostok by any means. We started simple, okay? And I want to just now kind of wrap things up. And this is this paper Kevin and I put together. And we published that in 2012. And I think what Kevin, you know, I've never really told you, so I don't want to get intimate with you too much, but, you know, but we both kind of put our scientific egos down a little bit. You're planetary scientists. I'm a microbiologist, or whatever you call it, microbial ecologist, and we kind of came out with some ideas that made sense. And we took Vostok here, some of the processes there, we applied them to what might be going on in Europa. And as I saw earlier today, you know, we have this perfect redox gradient with oxidants, reductants coming in here in lots of time to have life out there. So this was published in that paper, and I saw that this morning, this triangle of life. But I think we need to go beyond that now. I think we know enough about Europa or about earthbound systems to go more to what we're looking at in SALSA here. So we have our, you know, our microbial, our life down in here, but we now have this diamond up on top here. We have stability, time, things like that, advection, transport, water, oxidants, geothermal heat. We have a sediment system down here, and then we have subglacial water. And so I think we really need to get away from this. Not that it's basic and it's not wrong, but I think we can get a little more complex here in a conceptual idea to help build science ideas. Okay, and I'm going to just about wrap this over, turn this over to Dennis. This is a picture of our clean access system. We took a lot of effort and published a paper on this system. This is a 2-micron filter, a 0.2 micron filter, and there's 2 UV banks back here, and we devoted 30% of our budget in this whole system. So I had permission to show you a trip down the borehole. Okay, this is about a 1.5 minute trip, and then Dennis, you're going to go on. So this is standing up on the surface of the ice. This ring here, and I think Dennis will show you more detail, is a very intense UV radiation bank. So everything that went down in there came up, was hit really hard with UV radiation. And we would close this up, and everyone, you know, the lights, red lights would flash, and we wore UV glasses, etc. But here is, down here is a light, and the camera's obviously up, held up by these rails, and these are 20 centimeter whiskers, and we lowered this to make sure that our borehole had the integrity, was of the right diameter to lower our instruments. We took measurements in the lake with probes. We took samples out of the lake to do experiments, so we put instruments in and out a lot. So I'm just going to run this, and then we'll call it here on my part. Okay, so it's going down, this camera, it's going down through fern. This is snow that hasn't been consolidated into ice yet. And you're going to see a little hole off to the side, and I'm not going to go into the details, but that's a return water well that Dennis drilled. It's over here. So there's another short borehole. Now we're going down through glacial ice. Okay, This is going back in time, if you want. The ice is just getting older and older. And then around 750 meters, we had some issues drilling. And I'm going to blame this on Dennis, but the drill came up and moved over a little bit and went back down. We had this bifurcation. We couldn't get instruments into that. It was clear. So we only had 2 days to do this whole project. NSF asked if we could do transformative science in a day, and I told him yes. So, well, no. So then we had this happen. So Dennis and crew worked around the clock, and they threw in a bunch of heat. It's hot water drilling, and we were back on our way, and we were taking the pictures now, and then we broke out into the lake. And there's the sediments, and it was about 2 minutes of elation. Everyone was hooting and howling. There weren't many people sleeping. This is 24/7 work. And then we started the science around the clock for 2 days. And so I'm going to turn this over to Dennis. And he's going to talk about the rather non-elegant way we did the.
So I'm Dennis Duling, work for the University of Nebraska. And we were tasked with designing and building a clean access hot water drill for the SALSA project and other projects in the future. So, you know, when we got this, it worked out. You know, all the drilling in the past, they were small little units back in the day, and we'll give it just a quick little history. And it was usually scientists did it themselves. And they were just Hotsies. Most generally, that was the brand they used. And then they kept evolving, and usually by daisy chaining together for more capacity, but never was clean access considered. So then they got to a point, they used to shovel all the snow, and then it got to the point we're down to this with big tractors still trying to melt snow to get into these drills. And everything we had was wrong for what they needed for the WISSARD project and for the SALSA project. So they started, like I said, with small little drills, and that was exactly what they used. Then they chained them together. This is about half a megawatt drill or of thermal energy. This is one we put together, not clean access. Well, and then got up to the size of this is the ice cube drill for doing neutrino detectors. That's 5 megawatts of power. Again, though, not clean access. So with the WISSARD drill, it was the first attempt that I know of to do a large-scale mid-size hot water drill. Puts out about a megawatt of power, but it had to be towable, which makes it a little harder to do because a lot of your components, especially UV bulbs, don't like to be towed. This is a picture of it being transported. It's a fair size bit of equipment to move across. It's on a set of skis, and snow is not smooth. It's rough riding, very hard, can be very hard on your equipment. When it gets out to the location, we had the problem. Setting it up really wasn't a bad problem. This is a crane on deck, which they used to help set our drill head, also to set the science instruments. Some of them were rather big on this project, up, you know, well in the U.S. term, a ton. So this was out actually at, I think, the test site. So the problem we had when we started designing it, you couldn't adapt any of the other drills that were of the right size because basically they're all made of iron pipe and non-food grade everything. They're just car wash heaters. The hose for this didn't exist. To get a food grade hose with like a PA11 core and a urethane outer cover, you had to, and have it carry a drill head, you had to have it custom made. That was one of our problems, and nobody wanted to do it because of liability that, you know, we wanted it one section, and they said, well, do you understand our city's power system? Our machinery probably will never run that long. But we finally got it through Flex Company. And then fine components, with UV light that John showed, and what we have in the containers to be able to take the trip of being towed across the continent. So those were our big problems. Compared to what's going to happen in the future off-world, these are small problems, you know. So to make a clean access drill, first you go with everything needs to be stainless steel. and it's all high pressure hydraulic lines. So again, you have to have them special made. You know, they don't understand why you'd want that. Your tanks, everything have to be stainless steel, your pump stainless, filtration housings, the UV wet side, that filter, all has to be stainless and clean access. The fittings are off the shelf, but still, it's a major expense and it's a lot of work to get it all built sturdy enough to make the trip. That was kind of our big problem there. This is a picture of the hose. We left the dye on the outside, so you actually see the Kevlar liner that keeps it. This will come with a guarantee to, after 1,000 meters, to only stretch 0.5%, which so they say. So it's hard to prove it. The problem we had operational is this melt tank, for example. All the snow, to start a hot water drill like we do, you have to have seed water, a fair amount of it, you know, 600-700 liters of it. The dirtiest snow you have anywhere to work with is right around here where all these tractors have been running, no matter where they get it. And it turned out to be a major problem for our filtration at one point on the second drill season. But that's how we start it. And like I said, you can see it's stainless and it runs through the filtration and makes a loop until we get our tanks full. And then as we clean it, we do it with a 2-micron that John showed in the pictures, and then a 0.2, and we run it through 2 sterilizing units to take the different types of organic matter and break them into base material. We can run about 265 liters a minute through the filtration unit, which is about what the drill would put out at maximum power. The water comes out extremely clean. I don't think we ever had problems with tests of the water afterwards, but yeah, maybe we'll go further. There's another picture that John had, I think, taken the same day of the filtration unit. You see everything on there's big iron to hold it. Again, that's the problem you have transporting. Those are heavy filter housings, and if they're not anchored down the way they move this stuff, they'll end up coming right out the side of the building. And then all the food grade plumbing or hosing, and then the UV lights on the wall, you can see where the power goes in, and that's really the main component that converted this drill over to clean water. There's the outer UV collar. It's very lightweight because it has to be set in place, and that was very problematic getting it down there. It's considered, according to the manufacturer, the most powerful portable unit ever made. As they talked, you had problems with wearing glasses, but from an operational point of view, if we left it set, it would start destroying our hose, so we had to have it tied, so when our hose stopped, the light stopped. And then it was, but it did very well for cleaning. There's a view of it, and that was, like I said, between that and the filtration, the stainless, those are really our major components to convert this. There's a view looking down through it. Has double set of light bulbs, so if one burns, it doesn't matter, another one comes on, and we carry our own redundancy right there, which is, whether it be in Antarctica or off-world, redundancy is just, well, it just has to be. So when actually doing the drilling through ice is always similar. You know, it's just a jet of water. That's how we do it. We go down through 100 and some foot of fern, snow, and then we hit the area where the ice starts and it pools. And then as we go on down through that, we drop a stainless pump down to gather up and recycle our water, because otherwise it's just way energy inefficient to melt snow continuously. So what we do to keep to the cleanest water we can, at the top of the drill hole, I stop, we melt ourselves a cavity instead of using the melt tank, because that's the cleanest water we can get out of the environment there. And no soot from the tractors, no anything from the, and that works really well, and it gives us the ability to start much quicker Once we're down, before we do a breakthrough, I mean, just drilling down and stopping like with a big ice cube drill where it was just a bottom hole, it didn't go through, is easy. You just drill and you're done. But here you have to worry about the lake. So what we would do is pump our borehole down with a return water hole pump to get out of equilibrium by about 10 meters. So if you're 1,000 meters, we'd pump maybe 120 meters down. So when we do our breakthrough, we're guaranteed that we'll have at least 20 meters of water coming up the hole to flush everything. That was one of the big things. The other one is, and a problem with any type when you drill into a fresh water or anything where the water could freeze, if you don't drill through with the diameter you need, the minute you break through, you've lost your efficiency, because no matter what you do, that water is going to cool off your jet, and you're going to have a very small opening at the bottom, and you're going to contaminate that lake a lot compared to just going through with a big cone nozzle. But so it's important to have your diameters close to what you want when you break through. Then when you ream, you're going to be fighting it, but it works. So the other thing, or in our world, because we don't have the money to put sensors on a drill head, which I find just amazing. We have to do it all from topside. So the main sensors at the drill tower, we never would know if we hit the bottom and started off at an angle. So you have to have a very good load cell there to measure the tension on your drill hose. On the return water pump, that's where we kept the pressure sensor, so we would know when we were pumped it down enough to be under pressured in the hole so the lake water would come up. And that's the most important sensor on this project. And then an encoder to give you your payout. But that has, like, yeah, if they work perfect, but the stretch in your hose seemed to vary with the temperature of the water, you know, of your drill. If you were running 90C or 93, you could vary a little bit. Seemed like it changed the elasticity of it. And that's basically all you need to do to drill a hole. But I'm telling you, what we did would be, if you told us to drill it out, like build something for your rope, that'd be like telling the Wright brothers to put together a 747 for the first trip. It's a whole different game. What we need, at least with any drill, whether it be ours to do these lakes or theirs, you just really know you need to have good instrumentation on the drill head to know what's going on. I mean, it's, you know, I'm sure you plan on that, but without that, you're just shooting in the dark. We need better top hole instrumentation when we do hot water drilling. The reason being, we can test, you know, what's coming down the hole much better. We can test the salinity and the pH of the return water, know where we're at. And really what you need is a good team to build it and run it. So that's what we have. And that's the drill team taken in Antarctica. They just look so happy. And there's a picture I think John showed as well, down the borehole. Through the, when they were starting the camera down. And there's just a little, who was all involved. So that's it. That's how you drill in Antarctica.